All right, so let's get started. Thanks, Holly. Thanks for bearing with me, everybody. So as a preliminary matter, this is Hillary Hedges-Rayport, Chair of the Nantucket Historical Commission. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Clement Durkees.
Yes.
Hi, I see you talking. Holly Bacchus.
Present.
Tom Montgomery.
Present.
Okay, Tom. Betsy Tyler. Mickey Rowland.
Here.
Susan Handy.
Here.
Michael May. Hi, Michael. Georgia Raisman.
Here.
Angus McLeod.
Here.
And David Silver. Okay. David says he's present, but the chat is not cooperating. All right. So we've got confirmation from David. Great. So good morning, good afternoon, rather. This open meeting of the Nantucket Historical Commission is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to coronavirus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the virus, we've been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings. As such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted with agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely, so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. The meeting will feature public comment. For this meeting, the Historical Commission is convening by Zoom, as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please note that this meeting is being recorded. All attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you, and to take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials that have been provided by the members of this body are available on the town's website. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda, unless I note otherwise. We're turning to the first item on the agenda. Before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, question, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. Remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, wait until I yield the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. After members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public that have joined via Zoom, and members of the public who wish to speak must state their name and be acknowledged and speak to the chair. Each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call. Great, so that's that. So I can now see Holly's screen. And Holly, I'm gonna ask, maybe we don't need to share the screen right now so that we can all see each other. Is that possible?
Yeah, that's fine. I just do that as a customary whenever the agenda is being discussed before the meeting.
Oh, thank you so much. Sorry, I actually think I was, again, I had to get used to where things were on this new computer. So maybe I just didn't see the gallery the way I usually do when the screen is shared. All right, so the first thing is that I'd like to establish a quorum. I see that there is a quorum here. And invite any public comment. We have members of the public here for certain discussion items. Is there anybody who wanted to make a public comment? No. Okay. And the next comment is our annual report. So you can see there wasn't a draft suggested annual report. This would be for the fiscal year that ended June 30th, 2020. Is there, what do you all think? Are there any requested changes to that report? Any comments on the report?
I move we accept the report as written.
I just had one,
Yep,
if I may.
Yeah, of
I
course.
think it's great. I appreciate you including the notation about section 106. I just think that it should be outlined that both 1 and 2 of the projects that you've got listed here were section 106 reviews. I think that needs to be clear.
Okay,
Other than that, it's great. Thank you.
okay. All right, well, with that change, can we accept Tom's motion and ask for a second?
Second.
Thank you, Angus. All in favor, Georgia,
Aye.
Clement,
Aye.
uh, Mickey,
Aye.
and I think I got, oh, David.
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, great. So I will forward that on to Erica. So the next item is announcements. So I can't remember if we if I announced at our last meeting that our new mission statement, revised mission statement, is up on the website. So I couldn't remember if that was something that happened, you know, before or after our last meeting. But the mission statement is up on our website, which is terrific. So I just wanted to announce that. And then I thought, as far as other announcements, it might be useful to look at our project sheet and just kind of go through there to see if there's anything to announce about our different projects. I guess one announcement is about the Arthur Cooper Memorial. Was anybody able to see the article that was in the paper? Yeah. So,
Excuse me. Paul,
yep, Tom.
Last week and this week, they've been working on North Liberty Street, and they're right outside my house. My house is shaking violently. I just want to go take a look.
Is that why your picture is crooked behind you, Tom?
Maybe, I don't know.
Oh man, or it could be another earthquake. Did you guys feel the earthquake?
That was so weird.
Yeah. Crazy. Okay, so Arthur Cooper, you know, we took this to the land bank as a suggestion. They accepted it. Of course, Brian Bouchard covers the land bank, so he wanted to write an article about it. I asked if he would wait until, you know, everything was sort of more settled, the monument being designed and the donor being happy with the design and all of that. But he wanted to go ahead and write about it. I put the article in the packet. I thought it was a super nice article. And that is going forward. You know, we're working right now on the design of the plaque. And when we have something, I'll share it with you all. And the next step will just be to pick a place for it, a date for it to be installed and announced. Yes, Holly.
I was just curious, are you working closely with Mrs. White? She'll always be Mrs. White. She was my high school history teacher.
Oh, that's so nice. You know, we are not. We haven't really been in touch with Mrs. White. I don't know her, but I mean, it would be lovely. We have written that, we have approved the text. We could certainly, we approved the text working with Fran Kartunen, and we did look at the text in her book for information. But yeah, I mean, we would love to have an introduction to Barbara White. Certainly at the installation. Yeah, I have her book. It's a terrific book. Is she a great teacher?
Fantastic teacher.
Yeah.
She was one of those Nantucket greats that not only taught me, but and siblings, but also taught my parents. So.
Oh, that's so wonderful. What a treasure. And I love that she was sort of the centerpiece of that article, as it should have been. So I am now looking at page 87 of the PDF to what I did with this worksheet. As you know, these are projects that we're working on, but potential projects that we're not necessarily working on now, but we might work on. So not everything here is being worked on. I put a little yellow flag of things that had some work being done on them. So just by way of announcements, I don't know why I flagged design guidelines. I guess because it came up in our training. And just clarifying that although we have a grant for this and we'd love to get these design guidelines updated, it's really something to it's something that we can only have a supporting role on. We can't really lead that. If there's any way to have that joint committee that we envision get together so that we could start to work on that, I think it would be terrific. But I don't know how to do that at this point. Maybe we can talk about it if they come to the training on Friday. The mission statement is done, so that's going to come off this list. The joint project with the land bank, I just told you about. I put that up at a 4 because it's really we're just finalizing making the monument now. Hopefully that'll all go smoothly. The road construction bylaw, that is with the select board. So I basically just took the information that that we had done for the last town meeting that got deferred and updated it with our comments that we had discussed in our meeting, and sent it on to the select board. So they haven't had any public in-depth discussion. I haven't spoken with anyone privately about it. If you are in touch with any of our select board members, feel free to ask them about this, but it's, now we're just waiting to hear, and hopefully they'll put it on as part of their warrant. So the next one with the flag is the museum exhibit about preservation. I'm really glad that we have some other members of the preservation group here for this. So this was a project that was thought of by Esther Lee Stone, and I thought it was a great idea. And she presented some information about some documents envisioning what this exhibit would be about, with the idea that she would get feedback on the documents, that we'd work on the documents, and that she would present it to somebody who had exhibit space, and that we might actually be able to start putting this together. So I'm announcing it now, just that it is continuing to move forward. But this is a project that if people are interested in exhibits, and especially, I know Marty is here and Mary is here. This is really supposed to be a community thing where all the folks interested in preservation can kind of get together and shape the message. And it's about awareness on the part of the public, and bringing out, I don't think people really necessarily realize how much of what we have today is because of very courageous actions from people in the past. So that's the plan of the exhibit. Did anybody have any questions? Okay, so we'll keep working on that. And Mary, just know that I think Esther Lee has sent it to you and would love to have your feedback on that as she progresses it. I consider her to be the project owner on that. We're just supporting. The next thing with the flag is the preservation planning at Harbor Place. So we're going to talk about that today. Design guidelines for streets. So I did reach out to, I had concerns about all this, the road work that's happening for major redesigns of corridors. Pleasant Street, Sparks Avenue, Old South Road are all getting redesigned. Surfside Road is getting a lot of work. And there's going to be signage plans for all of these areas, road construction signs. And we did a lot of work on signs. So I volunteered to Libby and Rob that if they wanted, the Historical Commission could put together some guidelines working with the manual of uniform traffic control design standards, picking signs for different sign instances that would be preferable on Nantucket, just in terms of, mainly there's 2 factors, size and color. And there was not a lot of interest in that. So I'm going to consider that the town manager is really not interested in hearing from the Historical Commission about design guidelines. I wish that were different, but unless it's a section 106 where they have to ask us, because it's a federal project, I expect that we won't really be asked. There is one section 106 project right now, which is the safe routes to school. And I mean, I guess we'll hear from the Mass Historical Commission at some point about that. Holly, you haven't heard anything, have you? No.
Not on that one, nope.
Okay. So everybody get ready for more signs on Nantucket, big bright signs. The next thing on our list was building with Nantucket in mind. We talked about that. Yeah. Do you have any thought, Holly, about how we could get some energy around updating building with Nantucket in mind?
No, I don't. To be blunt, I've said it in time and time again, this island is just tremendously busy. I think people thought that Nantucket was going to be this sleepy little town during COVID this past spring and summer, and it's quite the opposite. So as you all know, I've said it that HTC is meeting multiple times a week, except for this week due to scheduling conflicts, but with other Zooms. But no, I don't see that in their wheelhouse, nor mine, quite frankly. We've got all these other different planning initiatives going on. I have to think proactively, and you know, it's on my mental agenda, actually on my list. And I wish I had better for you.
Okay. The last announcement I have is about getting together with Rob McNeil to actually give some feedback about the streets. So Holly, I know the date was the 20th, which is also a day that we have a historical commission meeting at 10. Did he have a time that he offered to meet?
Yes. Hold on 1 second. He said 1 o'clock or thereafter. So sometime in the afternoon, if that works.
All right, so
For
the
you
purpose
all.
of this would be to actually meet with Rob at the downtown area to give him some feedback on to listen to him about what's happening with the waterfront sidewalk work and to offer our specific design feedback, which we developed, but we wanted to offer in person, and we've just been waiting for a time when we could meet with him. So how does November 20th after 1 o'clock work? It's a Friday. Are there people who could meet downtown? We can't be, I guess, more than 10 people.
I can, Clement.
Okay.
I'm on island, Hillary, if you needed another person.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's really the question, is who is on island?
I'll be off island at that point.
Hillary, I'm on island. I'm happy to come.
Okay, great.
This is David. I'll also be on island and happy to attend.
Okay.
I just also wanted, I think I mentioned it to you, Hillary, that November 20th is the that morning when you all are supposed to have your meeting.
Yeah.
The HDC is going to have their special meeting for Two Stone Alley, which you all know is a contentious application. So I have to be there.
Right.
But you all can still meet without me.
Okay.
Holly, was that at 10 o'clock? What's going on at 10 o'clock that morning?
Yes, that will be at 10 o'clock. Yeah,
I
it
had
should
a-
be an hour and a half.
Okay.
And we also have a meeting scheduled at 10 o'clock.
We
Correct.
do. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that's your 10 o'clock is with us.
So I would also recommend to, if you all are going to have a quorum, to go walk around with Rob to just make sure that's posted as a walk around.
Yeah,
for open meeting law purposes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Tom, is your house still standing? Everything's gonna be okay?
Uh-oh.
Wax poetic without a mic.
Yeah. Can't hear you.
Hillary,
Yes.
that's Jordan. There's one other thing before we get off these projects. I did do a little poking around about the tax credits for commercial buildings, for restoration of historic commercial buildings. And interestingly, I found one relating to, I found that people are using the historic, the credits for preserving historic buildings for housing often. And I'm wondering whether that's something worth pursuing, as well as regular commercial buildings that are used for commercial purposes. I'm wondering whether I ought to just send an email or sit down with Tucker and find out whether there are any buildings on Nantucket that might be repurposed for that use and able to be used for whom a commercial tax credit would be available, would be of interest to the owner. Just, I don't know whether that's something he knows anything about.
I think it would be great. I mean, these tax credits for historic rehabilitation, they exist to encourage rehabilitation rather than demolition. So the more we can find out what kind of education we can do about this issue, what the need in the community is, the better.
I think a general idea would be when we are able, I think it's better in person, but when we're able to have some kind of a luncheon on that purpose for realtors in a slower time of year, I think that would be a good way of getting that message out. Sorry
Yeah.
about that, my phone is ringing. I'm going to mute myself.
Okay, I see Holly has her hand up.
Yeah, I just had a question about that because Massachusetts is pretty strict on the historic tax credits. For instance, it's usually for an income produced property. So housing obviously would be some sort of obviously rental component, not necessarily a ownership. They're few and far between on Nantucket. I recently, this past fall, or excuse me, spring, wrote a supporting letter for somebody for a historic structure on Nantucket that they did a fantastic job on. And I actually got to go and see the inside of it for the second time. And you know, that is there. And these people are great, going to be great stewards, and they're going to be obviously taking this structure and renting it during the summertime. So it's, I would also just make sure that each state is looked upon, because each state's differently when it comes to the historic tax credits. But I do know that Preservation Action has been very, very adamant. If you're not familiar with Preservation Action, I'd highly recommend you take a look at it. They are a large nonprofit that basically they push the federal government to look at preservation incentives, mostly the historic tax credit. So they've been doing a lot of that this past year during COVID.
I was thinking of it really from the federal tax standpoint, federal income tax standpoint, where it's, I would imagine, would be extremely useful.
Yeah. Well,
I agree.
some kind of a workshop, if we could organize some kind of a workshop where we could educate developers and property owners of commercial buildings about these tax credits and who can help them figure them out. And if that makes it a little bit more affordable to rehabilitate a project rehabilitate a historic building instead of, demoing it or building something new, I think that would be a big win. So Georgia, yeah, go for it, and let us know, keep us up to date. I can update the project sheet. Oh, I have one other announcement of a thing, which is Susan and I did connect about talking about archaeology and having a day about archaeology. We're going to talk about that tomorrow and see if we can come back to the commission with some action about archaeology and broadening our education and awareness. Does anybody else have any other announcements before we go to the staff update?
I'm not sure if this should go into the announcements or the other business, but in our Wisconsin Advisory Board meeting yesterday, we were asked by, who was it? The Civic was it Wisconsin Civic Association?
Yeah.
Wisconsin Civic Association, yes. Lynn Filipsky.
About the north path from Codfish Park up to the bluff. And I just thought that it might be of interest to us on the Historical Commission to weigh in on that. They don't have a set plan, and they're just looking for direction of what the path material should be. So if anyone's interested in putting that on our agenda for next time.
Okay. All right. I'll follow up with you about that, Angus.
Yeah, it's North Gully Road in Sconset. This is Clement.
Okay. Great. Okay. Terrific. So Holly, let's hear your staff update.
So first of all, thank you for participating in the first day of National Alliance Preservation Commission's camp. Very excited that we have that going on. So look forward to Friday. And then on Saturday, as you see behind me, the Community Design Guidelines charrette we're going to have via Zoom webinar. This will be with our consultants for our design guidelines, looking over basically how they're going to be put together, getting community feedback. So please put that on your calendar. That's something obviously you all know that it's part of the MVP Action Grant that we received. And there's a lot of communities within the Commonwealth that are looking at Nantucket through this whole process. Basically, I don't really have much more to say that, you know, those are some of the things that I'm working on. Very, very busy in this office. Just different aspects from resiliency planning to preservation planning and all these different aspects. Just want to let you all know that there's nothing that I do that's not preservation minded. You all probably saw this past week where FEMA presented a mapping study that they did that takes in sea level rise and erosion, and Nantucket was one of their case studies, and they're wanting to provide this information as additional resource, if you will, for our planning initiatives. And I was the moderator for that. We also had a kickoff internally meeting with our coastal resiliency consultants for that project, and very imperative that our preservation design guidelines are going to be a part of that project as well. And I'm very happy to know that I worked very hard with the RFP process with my fellow staff members to make sure that preservation was included in that, and was very happy to see that the consultant who was chosen also included as a sub-consultant our consultants for the design guidelines. So that's good. That means, you know, coastal resiliency and preservation are working hand in hand. And I know Marty could talk a lot more about that as well. We appreciate the work that PIN has done over the last few years. So with that, as you all know, if you ever have any questions on anything that I can be assistance to, you can always reach me by email. I am mostly working from home, although Mondays and Tuesdays I am in the office. Knock on wood, that's when my daughter is physically in the school building. So other days I'm working from home, but you can catch me by email. I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. All right, well, let's get into our one of our two major discussion topics, which is the discussion of surveys of historic structures. So we are going to be applying for a grant to have a project to start updating the surveys of historic structures. And I include you all have seen the pre-application form. We looked at it when we met on the 16th, and it's also in the appendix. I can see we have Brian joining us now. Brian, thanks so much for calling in. I know you're out in the field today. And we also have Marty Hilton and Michael May. And Mary is dialed in. I know she said she had something else going on as well, but hopefully Mary is going to be able to be live for this conversation. So what we know, I'll just brief you guys quickly. Tom and Don and I chatted a little bit to come up with some kind of approach. It's a really big project and we need to put some shape around it about how we're going to approach this. Do we just, well, I won't take you through all the different alternatives, but you know, we discussed that. And then we thought, you know, it really makes sense to talk to the Massachusetts Historical Commission so that they know we're thinking about this, and just get some engagement with them, because they're the ones who are going to be making the decisions about inviting people in for grants, and we wanted to get their advice. So we had a conversation with Michael Steinitz, and the notes from the conversation are in the packet, so you can review his advice. And he shared a couple survey plans. I guess if a community has many historic resources that need to be updated, and a very big project with big geographic area like we do, often communities will start with the survey plan. And what you saw in the packet was an excerpt from the survey plan for Marblehead. The survey plan for Marblehead is on the Marblehead Historical Commission website. It's over 100 pages. But what you can see is that they started out by defining the areas. They wrote a description of each area, and the task for the consultant in the planning process. And these consultants are folks that have a lot of experience in the field, or maybe have a master's degree in preservation. It's not a volunteer project. I mean, and it's not something that can be done without specific training in preservation planning or architectural history. But then they identified which structures in the areas were most likely to be on the list for more in-depth research. And then you can see the Marlborough plan also defines methodology, and they found it very useful to look at the teardowns so they could see which areas were under development pressure. I thought it was interesting because, you know, when the group of us got together, the small non-quorum group got together to talk about how to approach this, we didn't really want to spend time on a survey plan, because we felt like, well, we have this NHL document and we have this data sheet which already lists a lot of these buildings, so we should just go like get busy. But we were thinking in terms of areas, that we would survey a whole bunch of areas, identify resources to do more research on. The other way to approach it would be that we would just go building by building and do these in-depth Form B building inventory forms that we've looked at in the past. So that's kind of where we are. You have the information. The project could be a $40,000 project with us applying for a 50% match. Holly did speak with Andrew and is comfortable that in our pre-application we would cite the town as the source of funds. And now we have to decide how to go about it. I see a question from Tom.
No, it's not a question, just a clarification. We know that it's a $40,000, but it's really a $20,000 from us. It's a total of 40,000.
Yes. Yeah. 50% matching grant.
Right.
So the other thing that's in the packet are the areas. You can see, if you have it in front of you, scrolling through, you can see the areas that are defined for the master planning process. The town, noticed that the central business district and the Harbor Place / Wilkes Square area is carved out of that, but that's one area. Brant Point, Nantucket, Sconset, Surfside. Oh, the other thing I put in the packet that I just wanted to point out, Holly, if you want to share it on the screen, is the dots on the map. That's where existing surveys from 1989 exist. So you can see that the existing information we have is clustered in certain areas of the island. And what Holly told us is that there are actually many more surveys than what's shown on this map, and they're only in paper form. They're in filing cabinets at PLUS. So certainly we could get that over, try to digitize that and get that over to Macris so that it's available, and then maybe some more dots would be on this map. But nonetheless, all of these surveys are very old. So however we approach it, it would be a benefit. Mickey, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just reading through your comments about your conversation with him. You mentioned area forms as opposed to building forms. What is an area form?
So I could answer that, but does anybody who's really familiar with the MHC image, Brian, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I just, an area form is like a sort of miniature National Register nomination. Instead of focusing building by building, you look at an area, you describe it if it has cohesive characteristics or some characteristics, and then you prepare a list of the buildings within that area. So you can do, you really want to identify basic individual building information, but you don't have to go into the exhaustive detail building by building because you're putting them in the context of an area. So if they're an area that were developed, for instance, right after the fire with houses that were very similar from 1846-7, you might just treat that as an area, describe the houses, and then just identify them in a list. And so you can cover a lot more ground without doing form by form by form, but still get the information out there.
One of the things about the area forms is if you want to, I mean, what we want to do is make sure that the significant structures, you know, if there's someone who wants to make a change to the structure, that it's whatever approval is given on any alteration or demolition is sympathetic, and that we basically provide information that helps the HDC. And I think the area, so it's a balance between the individual building, but then also how the building fits into the context, the historic context. So that's why area forms are attractive, because it can talk about the whole context and other things that aren't covered if you talk about an individual building. But then the trade-off, of course, is that you're not giving as much detail about individual buildings. So for instance, if we take an area like Quidnet, we might want to talk about open space, the views, the scale, general scale of the buildings all together, and what would be like outline scale for a building. And that would be helpful in terms of understanding a building in the context. But I just wonder how it would be discovered. You know, if you're searching on an address, you find the survey for the building with that address, but you always find the area form. I was just wondering if they would really be used and be as effective. Brian?
I'm not sure whether they cross-reference the macros and check and include the addresses within an area form. If they did, you could actually put about the same amount of information into an area form, but you wouldn't have to go through the process of creating each individual form, all these separate photos. You can include quite substantial histories within it, or you could pick out the major buildings within the area and give them more detail in a separate building form. But the area form would cover a broad number of buildings, give some basic information about their context, their age, their architectural elements, and I think give a lot more information on which to judge for the HDC.
Any other reactions to the information in the packet? What should we write this? How should we approach this first? What should we write the grant for?
Hillary, this is Corey Hilton, the University of Florida Preservation Institute, Nantucket. I wondered if you could give me just a couple of minutes before you answer that, and can I just share with everyone, kind of remind people what we've been focused on with PEN over the last 3 to 5 years. And I even wonder, do you think it'd be worthwhile showing the database if I could share my screen?
That would be great.
Because I think that what's really key to these forms, yes, the state of Commonwealth of Massachusetts, or we have the same situation here in Florida, these forms are critical because that's what they go to, right, as the record of the cultural heritage, historic, architectural resource. At least in Florida, and you work more with Massachusetts, Holly, like in Florida, it doesn't exist unless there's a form, right? Whether it's an area or an individual structure. But in terms of like everyday use by the HDC or others, I think that's where the real challenge comes in. So what we've done, this is a project working with Michael May and Mary. Does everyone see my screen here? This isn't, I can certainly share it and people can begin to look at it. It's not quite live yet, but since 2015, we worked with the Nantucket Preservation Trust kind of informally and then more formally over the last few years to do an inventory of historic interiors, which is kind of a unique situation. I've never really worked on a project like this. But while we were doing the interior of the buildings, we were also photographing the exterior, basic information. We were dates, building type, very basic information. So we've now created this database that we're willing to continue to manage and maintain, that can be used by Nantucket Preservation Trust, the town, and others. So it just explains here that right now what we're focused on, what you're going to see, and this is all GIS based, by the way. So all of the information can be shared with the town, and we've been coordinating with them, right? So it's not a separate set of forms or processes, but it's all integrated. The first thing is historic interiors, which I'll show you. The next that we're working on is our sea level rise vulnerability assessment. So the areas that you showed and you talked about, don't forget, we've actually surveyed 2019, 2020, approximately 400 buildings from Brant Point to the creeks. And again, I think we have all the information that is needed for the forms for the state. So I think one of my things about in terms of what you're asking for, I think you want to coordinate with us carefully so that there's not you're not repeating data, but it might be that some little bit of funding just from the town side or the historical commission to work with us, right, to populate those forms. So what we've done is with the historic interiors, and what you're seeing is it explains the project overall, what our goals were, and you can read an introduction to the project. Click out of this. There's an introduction to the project, our methodology. It gives you explanation of how to use the map. And so what you're seeing, every building that's highlighted was ranked either a 1 or a 2, meaning the highest ranking for the survey. So if I pull up, this is 19 Liberty Street. It's got the parcel ID, the year built, feature, style. It was ranked 2. It's got also, if there's any kind of, let me just collapse this. If there's any kind of digital documentation, we've actually captured that as well. So there's a PDF for each one of these buildings that has at least a photograph that was taken within the last 5 years. And a little bit of background, if a house history exists, if Penn has documented it, anything, if there was anything in the NHA, we've digitized, and it wasn't digitized, we have digitized it. So there's now a profile on all of these buildings. And the goal that ranked 1 or 2, that was a little over 200, but the goal of this would be to just continue going. Our anniversaries in 2 years and the program, and we'd like to make sure everything we've documented is accessible on this map. But in terms of the project you're going to propose, I think we need to be looking at next steps of how does that information, you know, how do we disseminate that information? How do we put it in a tool? This seems like the tool. So I'll leave it at that and answer any comments. You're nodding your head, Holly. I don't know if how valuable this would be for you.
No, this would be fantastic, Marty. And I know, you know, I've always said that PIN is a resource. You've all been a resource since 1972. And I know in the last few years, you know, the program has evolved, obviously, with digitizing things. And I just remember always, you know, for instance, I did it in 2004, and we documented the Blair House on North Liberty Street before the land bank moved it. And that was all done by hand. You know, I never... everything was given by paper, but I know over the years that all the projects have, you know, has some sort of record, whether you all have kept it or NHA has a copy. I just know that that PIN in general has been a instrumental part of our documentation of Nantucket. So I just wanted to mention that this grant, you know, is just one step in the right direction. It's little, it's not obviously fully for the whole kit and caboodle. And my whole thing is we could get overwhelmed. So you know, $20,000 matching 20, so a total of 40 is really in my mind just a drop in the bucket for what we need to do for the NHL, but it's a start. Also, I will note that the planning directors, and I mentioned this to the commission before, the planning directors have put in $100,000 to our budget pre-COVID. I say pre-COVID because once COVID hit and we had to have everything tweaked and whatnot, it was removed, but it's going to be asked again. So hopefully we will have something, whether it's the full amount or something. So we will definitely have some sort of funding. I just don't know what yet, but I think the biggest thing for me as a planner is there's so many, and I know you, as you know, there's so many resources out there for this island. And I think even I think from what Brian has done with the NHL update, providing all the information, showing how Nantucket has evolved since the original update and how we are in the preservation world. There's so much information, and quite frankly, I have architects and designers who just go to the vault, as I call it, the HDC drawers, and thinks that's the end all be all, and it's not. You know, I introduced people to Historic American Building Survey. They had no idea that in the 70s there were quite a few studies that were done. Of course, they've changed from, you know, streetscapes to individual structures, but nonetheless, there is information out there. And I think what you all have created with this interior survey database would be such a great location to have everything included. I just think looking at it, we need to kind of take the entire NHL and dive down into like a macro size and figure out how do we handle this, A, without a preservation plan, and B, without doing a preservation area surveys.
Well,
I think
Holly, I mean, we can start with a study plan. I'm not, so I certainly wouldn't want to assume like, oh, we're gonna that's what we're here to discuss is what is, you know, how do we do it? I have a question, Marty. This information, I know I've asked you this before, so please forgive me if I'm being dense, but if I wanted to see this, I'm not a University of Florida student or faculty member. Can I see it?
This database as it exists now, yeah, absolutely.
I can, so we could link to this on the Historical Commission website and anyone could search it.
That's correct.
Okay, because I thought I had asked for that in the past and I was told I needed to have a University of Florida ID, that it was behind a firewall.
No, maybe there was a confusion there. When it comes to GIS data, that's a little more complicated getting that to you. But I can email this link to all of you right now.
Okay.
Marty, this is Mary Bergman, Nantucket Preservation Trust. I would respectfully ask that we plan the rollout of this. This has been something that University of Florida has been working on for a long time with NPT involved. And I would like to have a plan for how this gets sent out to the public, posting it on the Historical Commission's website.
Well, it's very helpful. I respect that, Mary, and I'm not trying to like glom onto this. I just wasn't aware that it was actually public. And but it sounds like it actually is. So it could be used, and I hope we can figure out how to use it. For the purposes of our survey, then, Mary, I mean, one thing we could focus on, for instance, if we think that there's a lot of information, I mean, we could take different approaches. We could approach this as let's find all the surveys that have already been done by Sconset Trust, by NPT, at working with PIN, and get them into the, we have to get them into the hands of people. So it has to be put into this MHC Form B, and it has to be uploaded into Macris. And ideally, there would be either a link or the information would be embedded into the town GIS, because it's like, what's the common point here? The point is that if anyone is applying for a certificate of appropriateness, they are going to go to the property record and print out the plot. No, you're shaking your head.
I mentioned that before, Hillary. As much as that's how I started as a planner, utilizing a robust GIS program, being able to look at a property card and say, hey, this is all the information. No offense to our tax assessing office, but not all of that is correct. It's not always up to date. They are in about 18-month behind time frame. So I think, you know, I cringe when people refer to the dates that are on, and people will do it on the property card information. I think that would obviously be great. And like I mentioned before, I think it would be great to have a layer that's available to the public, but I think that's down the road. I think first and foremost, our goal is to update the Form Bs so they're available through the town as well as Macris. And obviously figuring out this donut hole issue where we have some that are here in the office but are not actually on Macris. I think that's a first thing. And then those ones that I know quite frankly, there's plenty on Union Street in general that have never had a survey, that I can't find a survey. I know I can look in Lancaster. I know I can look in other sources and I can find information. So it's not just at a touch of people's fingertips.
Well, but our goal should be, I would think that, you know, someone in the staff, if the applicant should be providing the historic information, but if they don't, it has to be easy for you or other people in the staff or your successor in the future to be able to locate and pull up this information. So I was thinking that it could be living digitally in our town GIS. And of course it would be in Macris, but it takes them, you know, 2 years to get anything uploaded to Macris. So it benefits us to have it locally.
Absolutely.
Does anybody, Michael, I'd love to hear from you a little bit about what you think is the best approach, how we should start with this survey project. You're muted, Michael. We can't hear you.
Sorry about that. There's no one right answer. You can approach it many different ways. The one thing that, you know, I was thinking about, you know, the $40,000, it is a drop in the bucket and it's a great thing. But I would hope that we wouldn't be thinking that most of the money is going to be coming from the state, because it is just a drop in a bucket. That you might be looking elsewhere for funding to do that. You know, when we did the National Historic Landmark update, that was an $85,000 project. And so and that was just updating that project. It was a lot of work. Brian, you know, could tell you how much work it was. But, you know, when you think 40,000, it's not going to get you very far. That's one thing. The other thing I just wanted to mention, Marty has all that information about interior surveys. I think there are some state survey forms, I think, that they digitized. I'm not positive, Marty, if you tell me if I'm wrong about that. But when we had easements, when Brian did the easements for us, Brian and Betsy would often do a survey B form. So we have all those. And so those are in that system. You know, I think it's important to do a plan, but maybe at the same time do do survey work. I mean, you don't, you can start, you know, it's been piecemeal over the years. I wonder how many survey B forms there are on island. Does Holly, do you know offhand?
No, I wish. I mean, obviously all the restrictions that are out there have a Form B. There's quite a few projects over the years, I believe, that PIN has done that have a Form B. And then any individual ones, but not many. Most of them, quite frankly, are the ones from the 1989 surveys that HDC did.
Yeah, I think there are about 2,300 properties listed in Macris. And the only ones that would have a Form B would be if it was CPC, if it had a preservation restriction put in place. Otherwise, you know, even Sconset Trust has been doing very detailed surveys, like National Register level surveys, but nobody suggested to them that they use a Form B. So there have been no Form Bs.
Right.
So I think it's a very, very small number, Michael. And not
Right.
that, I mean, I think there's probably, the information is there, it's just not in a Form B.
Right, right. I mean, I like the idea of you know, building on, you know, the work that PIN has already done. I think it makes a lot of sense. And that, you know, I know that there's some volunteer work that can be used towards the grant. Why not have that volunteer work take that information they've done on the waterfront and put them into the survey B form, for example, you know, or start there. You know, I know they're 20th century buildings. When I was on the advisory boards, the 20th century buildings were always a problem because the survey forms that were done in the 80s may have said they're not contributing, where we know they are contributing now, 50 years old. So I think you can approach it different ways. You could do it by area, you could do it by age. I do think there is a lot of information, like Holly said, in downtown that we still don't even know. It's just amazing. You know, you come across a house and no one knows anything about it. You know, there's no deed research that's been done, that sort of thing. You know, there's no right answer. I think it's just what is the most useful for the HDC. I think is probably should be your guide.
On that point, Michael, you've known. Sorry to butt in, but I have to say this with your experience on historic structures. Mickey, Angus, you all on historic structures, Clement with Sconset. You know that there's information that has been provided from an applicant, right? But it's not necessarily in its own form. It's somebody took the time to go down to the NHA and do research, and provide historic photographs. Somebody's taken the time. Some of them have gone and done a little bit of deed research, and I'm talking about, you know, a few years ago. That information would be submitted to the HDC, right, to supplement their application. And then whatever happens to the application, it just sits there in the file. There's a lot of them out there that have been just done, and then they're in the application and then they're sitting. I cringe when I find them, because I try to make a copy and at least have it available. At one point too, I have a pile of them over here behind me. Macris also updates based on whether or not the structure has been demolished. So I've been finding that here recently. You talk about some of the 1940s, 1950s that are no longer there. I look and say, hey, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Nope, that structure's not there anymore, because a couple of years ago it was demolished or moved or what have you and replaced. So there's that disconnect as well. I really do. I'm probably going to be the one that's going to be on this one, but I really do feel that moving forward with this drop in the bucket amount of funding, which is, I'm appreciative that it's available from the state to begin with, moving forward with doing some type of infill with what we have versus what we don't have, and actually coming up with a plan to handle the other parts of the NHL. looking at our local 1955 districts, town and Sconset, before the entire island became a local district, before the entire island became an NHL, and looking at those donut holes that I know we have. That's just the way I would like to pursue, but
All right,
I
so
want to
that-
hear everybody on
That's
that.
something that's been put on the table then. Holly's preference is that we start with the buildings for which there are no surveys. Is that right, Holly? So the order, what we would try to get done is identify buildings that are more than 50 years old for which there are no surveys and do inventory forms. Is that what you're saying? Am I hearing you correctly, Holly?
Yes, I would like to have the infills done. However, I will say this, and I never really thought about, I think Marty really reminded me of all the work that they've done. And maybe that's also an avenue to go to.
Yeah.
As a joint
My-
partnership.
Yeah, I think my point of just sharing, I had 2 points. One is that there's a lot of data that we've gathered over the last 5 or so years. And I would hate it's a very small amount, as Michael noted, 40,000. I would, it would make sense just to understand what Penn has and can be used and not repeat that. And then the second is that when ready, whenever that is, and maybe we can all be in person again in the summer, we can sit down and look at this database once it comes out. It's not just historic interiors, but the idea is everything we do on the island now, at least from our perspective, will be documented here. And I think it could be a resource for everyone. We're willing to do that. So it started out as a smaller idea, but it's grown. So there's a tool that's coming online and there's a lot of data that exists.
Yeah. Okay, so what I think the point there is that whatever we do, we would want to make sure the consultant has access to all of the places where information exists, so that as we put things into the B form, they're not doing the original research again, they're not missing information, and we can get more bang for our buck. Who else wants to comment about the approach? So, Brian?
It seems to me the problem is there are a couple tasks that have to be done. One is gaining control of what's there. And if I may be so rude, part of what's there is absolutely useless information that's not worth spending much time on.
I
Part of
agree.
it's very good, and part of it's very good information. And then
Yeah.
the second is expanding the knowledge into areas that may be subject to planning changes, zoning changes. I'm with Michael. If I interpret him correctly, I think you can spend you can spend as much money as you can get for these sorts of things, but 40,000 is a good amount of money to make a good start on something. I think it'd be a real mistake just to have 40,000 produce a plan about planning. It seems to me that it ought perhaps to take a sensible look at what are the large areas that are going to be of immediate concern, and then maybe approach from the point of view of saying, do a sweep for all the buildings in those areas that already have some information, bring some order to that, and then supplement it with the things that are missing. Because I think in the end, you've got to come out incrementally better with control over the information that's available and new information. Otherwise, people aren't going to fund housekeeping, because the other is just housekeeping. And I think the two have to be done simultaneously. And I think your initial approach of breaking up the island into bits based on, threat or whatever those criteria are, gives you a good way to start with a place you think is the most endangered and produce new information and bring order to the old information. My thought.
Yeah. So I mean, this is why I included the Marblehead excerpt in, because I could see that being very useful and kind of pulling together everything people are suggesting, which would be, we would identify an area, we'd have to decide which areas are highest priority, or that could be part of the, the deliverable, but that it would go to these, we would start with areas, we would say something about the area, about what's important about the area, some fundamental research about the characterization, and then do some kind of a reconnaissance about what are the buildings, what are the properties of interest and what information exists. And then the next step, the phase 2, would be the actual B forms. And that would be for the grant. Now, this town, if this town is giving $100,000 for surveys, we can do other things too. You know, we could have another initiative for digitizing the files that are at Plus. We could have another initiative for taking the Sconset Trust and the PIN and NPT information and putting it in B forms that would run parallel. But starting with this area by area, I mean, we could also do periods. We could say the 20th century is under serious threat. And so we're going to actually prioritize island-wide 20th century, come up with some sort of philosophy about the 20th century, what's of value. So it could be, but that would be another kind of chunk this into smaller chunks by time period, by area. Holly, I'm just concerned that if we only do what isn't done, the problem is that what's done is often not really useful. And I see these neighborhoods getting just, you know, carved up and built, and the neighborhoods are changing and the neighborhoods are getting degraded because of what's happening to the buildings. And I worry that if we just do what's not surveyed, that's not really going to help us with what's surveyed but isn't of quality. That's my concern.
We have to start somewhere. And that's the thing. Again, it's the entire island that it's NHL. And my personal goal would be to get the entire island done. But again, we have to think about, you know, baby steps, what is actually achievable. We need to come up with a plan on how to do this. And quite frankly, looking at what I see comes across my desk every day, it goes to advisory boards, it goes to the HDC, you know, that I see that as valuable. I see that as let's trying to fix these donut holes and make them whole and then go to other areas. That's just,
oh,
and I'm
so
just one person.
So you're saying, Holly, that you're getting a lot of information that is being pulled together by applicants, and you want to have resources to get to, you don't want to just put that behind you on your desk to say, oh, I should get, you want to have somebody to give that to so they can put it into a Form B. Is that what you're saying?
If I summed up the last few years that I've seen, yes.
That there's a lot of good information all the time. Yeah.
That there's or it's just a bottom line of that there hasn't been an actual survey done on it, but there's information out there. Whether it's in Lancaster, whether it's in Foreman, whether it's at Habs that was already done before, or it's just, you know, and again, this trying to come up with a process, I knew it was going to be the hardest part. And the reason why I keep on mentioning about the grant being a drop in the bucket is because I know that it's going to cost and it's going to be and we all have agreed to this, that it's going to be a multi-year process. And from a planning perspective, I'm just trying to get a grasp on how do we go, okay, we've had this little bit of money that's available. I mean, quite frankly, we could apply to CPC. That's come across my brain this past year as well. Right. But where do we get this started? And as I'm hearing, you know, and realizing a lot of the information that PIN's done over the last 5 years, the fact that they're going putting everything into this awesome format, I see a benefit of working with Marty if he's willing to work with me.
Can I hear from some other commissioners about, you know, this grant is due on Monday. I just want to remind everyone. So it's a pre-application. It doesn't have to be perfect, but we have to land on some description, and we have other things to talk about. So so we have one suggestion on the table from Holly is that we just do infill, and we say to a consultant, you know, that you would just take buildings anywhere on the island that aren't covered and collect the information and start doing these Form Bs and get them over to Macris. And then we have another proposal, which is we do a survey plan where we look at regions. And we also have another proposal, which is we look at just start with the 20th century because it's so underserved and at risk. Could I hear from Mickey or Georgia, Angus, other people about what we should do?
Okay, I think,
Georgia?
yeah, I think I'm leaning toward that 20th century building approach. I know it's scattershot, but it's also the one that's most likely to go under the radar, where buildings are going to be destroyed and not noticed. And I don't myself know how many there are in that category that are worth saving. And I don't know how to me, not being an architect, it's a little bit hard to figure out where those standards are reached. And maybe that'll make this whole project not doable. I mean, not everything built in the 20th century is worth saving. Who determines that? And some of them were built by architects who had no sense that they were building on Nantucket. I mean, they're building buildings facing into the northeast where the water is coming in through the glass windows. So, but it seems to me that those are the ones that we're going to be losing. And then in 20 years, people are going to be saying, how did you let that building go?
Yeah. Yep. Okay.
That's an opinion.
Yep. Tom, you have your hand up.
Yep. I'm kind of with Georgia for different reasons, but I live next to two 20th century buildings, both of which are in jeopardy as we speak. And both could require saving, and both deserve saving. We already proved one of them, and the other one's next. And just on the architectural basis, if nothing else. But if it's 1975 or earlier, they're contributing, and that's that. And so somebody needs to step up and and survey these things. I know they've already been through the 1989 survey and the 2011 survey, and still they're in jeopardy. So we got to do something. And I'm just using things that I'm familiar with. There's plenty of them in this core district alone. Not to mention in Quidnet and Nantucket and every place.
So just to clarify, we're talking about 20th century, but 50 years old and older.
Right.
So I'm very personally familiar with the 50-year mark, and that would be 1970. And not everything from 1970 is going to be decided to be contributed, but that's what we're looking for advice on. Mickey, did you want to comment on this?
Well, Hillary, I think you're right that it is probably the most endangered. It's all, most of the demos are probably regarding that period. I just think it's going to be a challenge to identify the critical ones where we want to focus, but I don't, maybe that's not that hard. Prior to 1970, there wasn't that much development on the island. It was pretty limited. So maybe those won't be too hard to identify.
I think there's actually a lot more 20th century than people realize. When we did the survey in 2019 of the 300 buildings from Brant Point to the creeks that were the core of the waterfront, 75% of the core of commercial downtown was built after 1900. Nearly 50% was built after 1945. So it was something around 15, 17% that was actually whaling era. And that's your historic core. That would base most of them on Main Street.
Michael, what do you think about this idea of starting our survey? So putting aside the idea that we'd start with the survey plan because we have our NHL and we have our structures list and, we know our regions pretty well. So we would start with a period.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would work well. Doing 20th century. I was just thinking something like Tom Nevers, you could do an area form for that. But there are some wonderful buildings, as Marty said, in Brant Point that I know Mary was really interested in some of those and found out about them. One thing that I know that when I was at NPT, when you do the research, the deed research, and then maybe an hour or two research on some of these 20th century buildings, you can find amazing things about the architects, the owners, and that's the kind of thing that that the state really wants to see in a survey form. But it's also a fascinating history that that's kind of missing on Nantucket in general. I mean, there's you can find a lot about the 19th century, but you can't find very much about the 20th century unless you're going to the newspapers. So, and people, didn't collect the, maybe it's too soon or too, not distant past. So, but I think that would be a really great thing to do. The 40,000 wouldn't go very far, but it would at least, maybe you start with the historic, the old historic district in Sconset or whatever, so you could limit it by the period and also by area.
Angus, did you want to say something?
There are just so many. I mean, you point in any direction, any of these directions that we've talked about, and there's a need for representation. I would generally tend to believe the older it is, the more valuable it is, the more we should invest the effort to protect it. But with that said, I feel like the 20th century is probably the least protected and represented. And for that reason, that might make the most sense to focus our energy on first.
Yeah, I think the Brant Point area is definitely a targeted area for development, and lots of 20th century structures in there.
If there's any area that's currently, being threatened, there's a lot going on there of work.
Clement, did you want to?
Yeah, well, I liked Brian's idea of kind of, it seems like everybody keeps saying there's a lot of information out there. You have to go to Lancaster, you have to go here, you have to go there. Is there a way that we could try to consolidate all of that? And then, so everybody has the same reference point, bring in Marty's stuff, bring in, try to get that all together so we have one access point and then fill in.
Well, that's what the Form B would be. So, if we, whatever we decide to, whether we do it by geography, whether we do it just by kind of, randomly based on the fact that it hasn't been done and it's more than 50 years old, or whether we focus on 20th century, the consultant is going to be preparing these Form Bs, and they're going to be pulling together the deed research, what they see themselves in the field, the information in Lancaster, Dupre, the information in the newspapers about who owned the place. I mean,
so there's no way to consolidate. I mean, I guess once that's done in the Form B, then it's all consolidated in one place for each individual property.
They're going to use they're going to go to every source they have.
It'd be awfully nice to be able to punch one button and that's what you would find, but that's the end game.
Yeah, well, certainly, I mean, there are communities that have done that. And when something comes before the Historical Commission, the staff has already surveyed everything. So they just kind of pull it out. And that's what we're getting for. And I just want to emphasize, let's not be intimidated by this task. I mean, every community all across the Commonwealth and every historic community all across our nation is dealing with this. And whatever we do, it will be an improvement.
It will be,
yeah. But nobody's as large as we are.
Well, but that's not really true, Holly, because I'm sorry, not to contradict you, but like if you look at this form in Marblehead, I mean, it is enormous, and they take a much broader view about what they care about. So we're busier because there's so many things that we regulate, but we're not that as big. So I just don't want to get discouraged. I just think that and so I actually think a fundamental question is, do we start with writing a grant to do a survey plan? And I don't mean a plan about a plan, but somewhat like where we focus on these areas, write up the characteristics of the region and flag the resources. And we might not produce a single plan B, but we'll have a methodology, we'll have a prioritization of what is most threatened, what is most important, and which areas we're going to tackle with the Form Bs. And we go back year after year after year and chip away at these areas. That's the survey plan approach. Or do we say, to hell with the survey plan approach, we just want to jump right in, producing these Form Bs, And then we have to pick which area we're going to cover first. So maybe I'd like to just get a sense of the room of which direction people want to go. And I'm going to ask for, okay, I see Tom. Tom, you're muted.
Sorry.
Tom, what way do you want to go?
Am I muted now?
We can hear you.
I'd go with the second one.
You want to jump right in with Form Bs?
Yep.
Okay. Mickey.
I kind of like the notion of having a plan that we can get organized and just follow a system. So plan.
Okay, Clement.
I like that doing the survey so we have a plan to follow. I agree.
You want to do the plan. Okay. Georgia.
I think I'm a jump right in.
Okay. Angus.
I think, so when we're talking about the plan, is that pulling in information from the other places, or that's the Form B and what people are referring to as jumping in?
The plan would not be producing Form Bs, but it would be surveying what information we have, where it is. It would be producing like what you saw in our packet that Marblehead had produced, and a roadmap and a methodology about what we're going to do.
I think I would lead in that direction.
Okay, so you want to plan. Susan.
I think I like a plan.
Okay. That's all of our commissioners, but David,
Yes.
what do you think?
I'd hate to divide the room, but I think I'd like to jump right in.
All right, you're a jump right in. And I'm actually in the plan category. So I could see it both ways, but you know what is steering me towards a plan is I just don't know how long, like things could change. And if we get a roadmap down, at least there's something for somebody else to follow. But I'd love to hear from Mary, Michael, Holly, and Marty. Do you feel very strongly one way or another?
I don't. I think I think a plan's good, as long as it's something that doesn't just sit on a shelf.
Mhm.
And I don't think that should. I think you can still, if something happens and you want to volunteer to do a few forms, so you personally all know how it's done. That's a great start, you know. But I also like jumping right in.
You know, it's hard not to jump right in.
Both, but you know, maybe you look at this grant as the planning grant, and you pursue other avenues too.
Yes, we could jump right in with other funds from the planning department. Mary or Betsy? Oh, sorry, Tom.
Sorry, that would have been my defense about the way I wanted to go. We always do that.
Yeah. Mary, Betsy, did you have any comments?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I was really, I liked the discussion about looking at the 20th century. I think our recent past I know that our recent past is something that the HDC completely struggles with.
Mm-hmm.
People on that board, well, maybe not on the board, but there are people in the community who believe that the HDC exists to protect Nantucket's whaling heritage, not the architectural heritage of this entire island. That is the area, the 20th century structures are the ones that are threatened the most by demolition. Like Mickey mentioned, Hulbert Ave has a twin threat of people not understanding that something that was built in 1920 is 100 years old. And that it's also threatened by inundation from sea level rise. So there's a lot of work going on there. I believe that it's important to do this work now because we're just going to continue to lose more structures.
Well, Betsy or Marty, did you want to say anything else here? Or Susan, did you want to make a comment about this?
This is Susan. I kind of thought that we possibly could look for other funds to do these two things somewhat simultaneously, because I do love jumping in. And so it's hard for me to say, no, let's stop and do a plan. But if we do a plan that includes some action, requiring us to take action, I think that that's the roadmap that you're talking about that continues on. And again, we look for other funds and start looking for people as well that can jump in and start the other parts of it.
Okay.
I think a plan does allow you, there's been a lot of different resources or sources of data that have been discussed. So making sure you have a really comprehensive list of all of the data that you want to pull together, digitize. I think that's important, and having that methodology and looking toward, yes, producing the macros form, but again, a database or how it becomes this usable tool, making it accessible. And I think working with existing partnerships like, NPT and NAB, like this summer, we're going back to the Washington Street area that we looked at last year. So we could, as part of our program, working with you all, determine which sites in the Washington Street area, like Holly mentioned Union Street, at least the Union Street buildings, maybe we make that the students with oversight by me could produce the macros forms or update them. So we could start integrating that into our process.
Yes, certainly, if we could get the nonprofits and other groups that are doing surveys to start using these Form Bs, that would be just all the better. Okay, so I think we had 5 people for the plan and 3 people for the jump right in, but everybody seems to want to figure out how to do both. And with the jump right in, the energy is around 20th century. Am I getting that correctly, or does anybody want to make an alternative hypothesis there? Okay. So we're going to write the grant, the pre-application for the grant for a survey plan. Holly, are you comfortable with me writing this up and working with you on it?
Sure, I already started, but okay.
And I'm comfortable, I can drive it down there in person to the MHC, just so we have a little more time. All right, so we're gonna do it then, folks. Do I need to take a vote on this? All right, so could someone make a motion? Georgia, we can't hear you.
Oh, so moved, sorry.
Okay, so just to be specific, the motion is that we're going to write the grant for a survey plan. Hillary and Holly are gonna work together to get the grant written.
For the pre-application on Monday.
For the pre-application, yes. And then we're going to explore the 20th century actually producing the inventories.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hold on. Sorry. I think I'm confused now. So everybody voted to do the area survey plan.
Do a survey plan. Do a survey.
Okay.
Plan.
Which, yeah. Hey, I'm the planner in the room, so I do get it. I'm just, but then focus on 20th century. I'm lost how that.
No. So for the purposes of the MHC planning grant, we're going to start with writing a survey plan. And, we can give some shape to try to make that as action oriented as possible, but that we're really going to ask for a consultant to help us identify resources, prioritize areas, and create a roadmap about how to get all of our surveys updated.
Right.
That that we and future commissions can follow and fund year after year. It'll include an implementation plan and some kind of time spec for how long it's going to take us to do that. So we're going to end up with a roadmap. However, separate from the grant, we would like to pursue, the planning department is asking for funding, and this commission is saying, with the additional funding beyond the $20,000 that we'll ask for the $40,000 project, we would like to deploy that on updating inventory forms and understanding of our 20th century structures.
Okay. So two separate things. Gotcha.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to take a vote. Clement? Aye or nay?
Yes.
Yes. Mickey?
Yes.
Tom? Georgia? Aye. Angus?
Aye.
Susan?
Aye.
David?
Aye.
And I am an aye. Terrific. Okay, so we'll copy you all on the pre-application and confirm that that gets in by Monday. Now we have some time to talk a little bit about the next item on the agenda, which is Wilkes Square redevelopment and Harbor Place.
Hillary,
Yes, Michael.
I had to leave, but I just wanted to say hi to everybody. I miss you all, and hopefully I'll see you next summer.
Michael.
Great to see you, Michael.
Thank you so much for being here to help
Oh, you're
us
welcome.
with this important decision.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, so Wilkes Square. So was a bunch of information in the packet that was gleaned from the 13 years or so of work that has been done with the idea that eventually this area would no longer be needed for generating electricity and storing fuel. And now, oh, it sounds like Betsy is leaving too. Thank you, Betsy, for being here. So now the town is working on a planning proposal for rezoning the area and having some kind of a development agreement with the owners. It's not owned by the town. It's owned by National Grid. Winthrop owns the Stop and Shop, which still has a 10 or 11 year lease left on that building. And they also own like 2/3 of the parking lot, which is subject to Chapter 91 public access license. And they own the area under the tanks, which is very polluted. And then Nantucket Island Resorts owns a little sliver of the parking lot. Well, it's more than a sliver. It's like 1/3 of the parking lot. So the town doesn't own this area, but there is, of course, a town responsibility for having some kind of vision for how this might develop. And a lot of work was done on this in the Wilkes Square plan. So I see that there is a preservation planning function here that this commission, which thinks about how new developments relate to our national landmark, how new zoning shapes, heights, layouts, open space, that all affects our landmark. This area is 50% of the size of the existing downtown. So how it's going to get developed is really going to have an impact on people's experience. It's also the gateway for many visitors coming to the island. I think I just wanted to put on the agenda the opportunity to study this, to develop a point of view, to think about how we could contribute productively to the discussion. We haven't been invited into the discussion, but that doesn't mean we can't contribute. I also want to mention that the current proposal includes a lot of changes to the margin of the area. So requests to widen Straight Wharf, AKA Lower Main Street, to request to widen New Whale Street, which is the road that runs along the waterfront. And I just like to, maybe in the spirit of the Quaker meeting, hear people's reactions, concerns, thoughts, comments. So I'm gonna leave it at that. Yes, Mickey.
Yeah, this is a huge area, and it's going to have a major impact on the downtown in terms of the sense of what downtown Nantucket really feels like. And I'm not sure that the current zoning that's in place or what they're even proposing is in some regards restrictive enough, because they could, they could build wall to wall. If they change it to commercial downtown zoning, you can get buildings that have sort of the density of Main Street in this area. There's no side yard setbacks, I'm pretty sure, in commercial downtown. So, do we want or even need that much density, commercial density in this area? So to me, it seems like it should be a little bit more sparse, maybe more like the outer edges of the commercial area, like Federal and Center and South Water Street, that sort of density. But that's not where it's headed at the moment. The zoning is not that restrictive. So I think that a good direction to start with would be to look at what's proposed for zoning, and maybe not to fight with the planning department, but just to maybe come up with a more creative approach for like an overlay district that might have a little bit more structural design, maybe that form-based zoning type of an approach that would keep it from being overly developed, really dense. That's my concern.
Okay. Other comments or questions too? I've studied this a lot, so I can answer questions. I'm sure Holly can answer questions. Mickey can answer questions. No, don't be shy about asking questions. We don't expect everyone to know about the zoning down there.
Well, I don't really have a question at this point, but I agree with what's been said about this having such a major impact. And it is the gateway. It is going to be most people's first impression of Nantucket. And the lower density and the lower height, I think all contribute to the feeling of what we know as Nantucket. The historians on the panel would know about 3-story storage buildings and sail lofts and all kinds of things that were around in the whaling era that had a higher height than what we have there now. But I would hate to see that taken as precedent for going side to side, front to back, and 3 stories. So I feel like we need to be really careful about that, and however we can guide or advise or steer the powers that be in a responsible direction, I'd like to advocate for.
Georgia, did you want to say something?
Whenever I hear this area being talked about, what I hear is parking garage.
Yeah.
Also, it just makes me start to scream, because it just reminds me of a suburb of Boston. Forgive me, Hillary, but it reminds me of a suburb of anywhere. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you remember, but when we had the discussion a few years ago about what was going to take the place of the A&P, and it was the Nantucket Island Resorts had offered us a lease to CVS. The whole discussion was, when you get off the ferry, having paid all this money to come to Nantucket, what you don't want to see is another suburb, because why pay all the money to come to Nantucket and go and see exactly what's around you in Darien or in Marblehead, forgive me, but you don't want to see a suburb. So, and unfortunately, even the land bank these days seems to be building suburban parks. So I think when we want to opt in, we want to opt in for something that's still looks like Nantucket. If it looks like what Commercial Wharf looks like now with those tiny little shacks, or whether it looks like something that a little more like Main Street, but not so dense and not so high, but not a parking garage, and not a, even if it's more like Straight Wharf, not something that's going to be just like another suburban development. And that's what worries me the most, the idea that it's just going to look so manicured and so much like Darien that you're going to think, why did I bother to spend all this money to come here?
I was just going to say that what struck me the most was that they're trying to make it a huge transportation center whether you want the bus or a cab or a shuttle to your hotel or your car. It all seems to be concentrated right there. And I assume that's because obviously people are coming over on the boat, but all of that stuff is, I mean, it doesn't seem to me that it's going to ease any of our density problems by having all of that right there together. And I don't like all of those retail shops. I mean, just to say that the parking lot actually creates open space. You think how ugly parking lots are, but it's wide open right there at the beginning, and it has a lot of plantings in it. And when you see one of the plans that had kind of a little retail quadrangle with all of these stores all around instead of the parking lot, it looked really tight and dense to me.
Reminds me of Haymarket.
Yeah, Haymarket. Oh my God. So it needs, so thinking about the open space. Yeah, I was also concerned about, well, the Wilkes, I really loved the Wilkes Square plan. I thought there was so much to like there. I mean, it does have a lot of buildings that are 3 stories high, and it goes up to 40 feet. And that's a problem if everything is that high, like if it's just rows and rows of these huge tall buildings. But what it has is it has a new street grid. So, you can't improve circulation. You've got more and more people coming, wanting to be picked up, and you've got more and more transportation possibilities. So everybody's getting their Uber or their taxi. And if you're cramming more and more cars into just the finite existing streets, the fact that they're wider is not necessary. It'll make things a little bit better, but it might just mean we just have wider streets. The Wilkes Square plan had a whole new circulation plan and different uses for the circulation. So some people would, and the idea of the kiss and ride, where there's a place for cars to be, and then they can come and drive through and pick people up in an organized way, and that general traffic isn't going down there was also an advantage. But I really focused on the street grid, that there was some kind of the block by block organization with the infrastructure and the street grid in place. And then the developers can decide, what the market needs. Do they need cottages? Do they need retail? There should be flexibility about that. But I think only the municipality can provide the vision for this street grid. So I just wondered why that went away. What was wrong with that? Why wouldn't that still be something that, and also the open space? And why wouldn't we, from a planning perspective, be thinking about these view corridors? And, if the whole area becomes commercial downtown, that's 30 feet and above by special permit. And it could be anywhere. Why wouldn't we want to be a little more precise about, yes, okay, you can have a 40-foot building, but it needs to be here. And if you're going to have a 40-foot building, there needs to be a certain amount of open space associated with that. These kinds of discussions.
Hillary?
Yeah.
Other than when the fast ferry comes in, how much actual gridlock is there? It seems to me, and even that is limited to a certain number of months a year. I mean, I go down there and pick people up from the fast ferry. So, okay, for a period of about half hour, there's a lot of waiting around, picking people up or dropping people off. But the rest of the time, there's just the usual, parking to get into Stop and Shop. And I just can't see it as a parking issue and a gridlock issue that requires such huge rearrangement and widening. It's like a tail wagging a dog. I don't mind the transportation being off to the side where it now is, the Greenhound building. And I don't understand why we need a transportation hub, as though transportation is the tail wagging the dog here. I just don't see it as that huge a problem. I mean, how inconvenienced are we if we have to go down there and walk, sort of halfway up the parking lot to get the taxi? I don't know, it's a tail wagging the dog thing. I'm just not, and I like my car. I don't mind picking people up, and you have to wait a while to circle the parking lot or park further up toward Main Street, but so what? How often does that happen? How inconvenient is that?
Does anybody else have a different view about yeah, Mickey?
Well, I was just going to say, not to sort of sidetrack this, but we can talk an awful lot about different uses and functions in the getting into the weeds and the planning. But as a historical commission, what kind of direction, what kind of path do we want to take? We sort of need more of a, sort of a kind of a plan to move this discussion forward within ourselves, and to get it to the town so that they'll listen to us. So I'm just sort of wondering more holistically, how do we start off and approach this one?
Also, what's at stake at the town meeting now? What's
Well, we don't know yet. So an important date is November 18th. The planning board is going to be discussing what they want to put on their warrant, and they might put a request on their warrant. And I have some thought, Mickey, about what we could do. I really thank you for making that comment, because it's true, we're not transportation experts. But what I think would be important, and I'm thinking about Frederique's comment in our training about how in Palm Beach, they looked at what they had, and they actually measured the amount of open space and the shape and heights of the buildings, and they used that to inform future zoning. So we have commercial downtown zoning, which allows 75% lot coverage, edge to edge lot coverage, and 30+ feet of height. And that may be what we have on Main Street, where we have corridors where the buildings are edge to edge, but it's not what we have in other areas of the commercial downtown or the other more outer areas of the downtown. So one thing that we could contribute to the discussion is a little bit more information and study around the shapes that exist. I don't think we're going to get a lot out of the history of this area, because it was a really, there were smokestacks down there and huge, tall warehouse building. I mean, aside from recognizing that the two existing old brick buildings have potential to enrich the community if rehabilitated, does anybody disagree with me about that? I mean, I think we get a lot more looking at existing old areas in the commercial downtown, understanding the shapes, forms, heights, setbacks, open space orientation, and then saying, we don't get that with CDT, or maybe we say we do get that with CDT. I don't know, but that's kind of how I'm thinking we could contribute. Holly?
So first, I just wanted to mention that this project has been discussed for many, many years. So I don't want you all to get just focused on, there's multiple different plans, different studies, all on this whole concept. Bottom line is, this is an opportunity for the town to actually put some thought into a development area, or pretty much these owners, that the town's not one of those, could just do whatever they want to do, quite frankly. So I just want you all to realize that first and foremost, that this is an opportunity. Therefore, that's why an MOU would be, or a development agreement would be being discussed. So this is not just like, oh my gosh, this has to be done. This has been something that's been going on and on and on, and it, different plans, different political people, politicians with select board and all that kind of stuff. So first and foremost, I wanted to mention that. Second off, when it comes to any zoning change that's reflected in the master plan, to say we don't want to have RC, RC2, there's reasons behind that, and therefore those are those reasons why they're recommended through the planning process into town meeting. So there is a phased RC2, R2, RC, all those are requested per the 2009 master plan to be phased out. That's something to have that in the back of your head. But I would recommend looking at and recognizing that this was an industrial area of downtown. Before Beinecke took it over and redid a lot of what you see now, that's all it was. So maybe looking back into the history of those structures of Commercial Wharf, of how it went farther down Commercial Wharf. There was a larger building, I believe, some sort of a dance hall of some sort back down there. There's history to this location. And that would be something that I think this commission could provide in this redevelopment of this area. Also, the fact of the matter, looking at the fact that they're looking at Wilkes Square. Who's Wilkes? Who is that gentleman? Why are they wanting to, why is there a monument across from the American Legion? What did he contribute to Nantucket as well as to this country? I think that's an opportunity as well. They're looking at maybe, having a larger monument to that. From talking to the planning director briefly, that was something that would be encouraged. Looking at the history of the scale that was down there, and what exactly is important. Not, again, yes, you all are, and I'm not. I'm a planner, but I'm not a transportation planner. I don't want to be one. We're not looking at those aspects. We're wanting to look at how we want to see it. I sympathize and I understand about wanting to have a different type of zoning, and maybe it's thinking about something different than CDT. I don't know, but I think that would be a stretch, to be honest with you. Overlay districts are something that we are trying to phase out at the master plan, so I don't encourage recommending that. I'm trying to help with this conversation. I think looking at the history and what it could be, what it was, is going to be important. And maybe in looking at the history of the structures that have been surveyed by PIN down there, look at what Beinecke actually built, AMP, for instance. Could they utilize and adaptive reuse that structure? I would just encourage looking at the history and looking at photographs of what was down there, and instead of, I guess, being reaction to what you see in a plan, because there's been different radiation. I can't even speak.
Iterations.
Iterations, yes.
Yeah.
I just want also, I know we've had a lot of discussion today, and I know we have a couple more things on the agenda, but I do have a meeting at 3 about resilient Nantucket, so I just wanted to mention that. Sorry.
Okay. Sure, Holly, you can, make me host if we need to continue the discussion. So Holly, there is information in our packet about who was Wilkes. I don't know if you saw that. And as far as the history of what's down there, I mean, this was an industrial area. I just don't, is there anybody on this commission? I'm not against looking at the history. I love looking at the history. And I'm also recognizing that we're building on 13 years of work on this. And a lot of thorough work. I mean, the CBT plan, I don't know how much the town paid for that, but it is an awesome plan. And it had Copley Wolf design landscape architects involved. It had economic planners involved, as well as just the architectural planning. It also had Chapter 91 review from Epsilon. So this is like a top-notch piece of work. And it's frankly a lot better than what's being looked at right now. It's not perfect, but so I guess I'm really wanting to go back to the work that was done. And the fact that it's been talked about for 13 years and there is no comprehensive vision being put forward by the town is actually really troubling to me as a resident, as well as in the role with the commission.
I would just, and I understand that, I would just insert the fact that it's not just the town. You've got other development, property owners involved. It has to be a mutual agreement. So it wasn't just like the town just dropping the ball. Something needs to be done, or those property owners could say, bye, we've given you all the opportunity to do something.
Well, but then they're stuck with RC. I mean, they could develop it right now with RC. They've got pollution issues, remediation issues, sewer issues, infrastructure issues. I mean, they need the town. They've got zoning as it is, which is RC, which means that they have 5,000 square foot lots and 50% coverage, which probably isn't right for everything. So the town could offer them something a lot better while also, you know, making it clear that everybody should be on board, as is recommended in the CBT plan, about what should be there. So, so I'm just looking for some guidance. So I guess, Holly, I just want you to understand that the reason why all that information has been included from the history is to make sure that all the commissioners and anybody else who sees this meeting understands that we can learn so much from all the excellent work that has been done.
So absolutely. I just wanted to make a mention that this is, you know, some people probably had not heard of, you know, this whole proposal, Harbor Square, Wilkes Square. I think there's been different names over the years, that this has been an ongoing, different phased, you know, thing, and nothing's set yet.
Well, there's now a lot of motivation to get something done, to make some zoning change from RC to CDT with some kind of development understanding about what will be built. And it's our opportunity to weigh in with what we think, as Mickey said, so hopefully so that it'll be additive to the discussion and that people will say, thank you, we didn't think about it that way, and that's really helpful, is certainly how we want to approach this. And I'm just wondering and looking for the commission's advice. I have some ideas, but I'm not the only voice in the room about how we could go about putting together that point of view and being a really well-informed voice about preservation planning for this parcel. Does anybody want to make some suggestions about what we could do next, if we should do anything next?
I'd like to hear what your ideas are, Hillary.
Well, I think looking at what we have, I think CDT is a really blunt instrument, and looking at something a little bit more granular about what we have that works so well at the waterfront, building on the Wilkes Square plan, and maybe looking into form-based zoning and how that's been used could be really helpful to the discussion. And Holly, I see you rolling your eyes about form-based zoning, and I don't understand why.
No, I just say good luck.
Good luck with which aspect?
I just don't see that being something that would be proposed.
Form-based zoning, or us having a look at what exists downtown?
Well, you know, quite frankly, I think you'll probably ruffle heads saying we as the planning commission, or, you know, I mean, not planning, the preservation commission wanting to do form-based zoning down here. I don't see it being something that's going to be supported. I really don't. I'm just trying to be.
If I could say something here, yeah. Even if it's not supported, I think it's doesn't mean that these things shouldn't be considered and put as a backdrop for other forms of discussion. So I don't think we should just out of hand dismiss that kind of idea. I would agree that that might be an interesting, whether it's agreed upon or not, it's still an interesting, as I say, kind of backdrop to look at all other different ways of doing this and having some sort of say in it. That's it.
Yeah.
And actually, I will say again that, you know, I sat in on some of these early meetings for both of these proposals. I was lucky enough to be invited as a business, downtown business person to have a voice in some of these early discussions. And I think that I remember seeing most of the other commissioners at some of these meetings as well. I think that most of us have been fairly active in these for quite some time. So I'm really excited